I've never had any trouble making money in Three Kingdoms, but I get asked about it quite a lot. And when I sat down to write the script for this video, I wanted to come up with a really quick 1 or 2 sentence summary for you guys to take away without having to slog through 15 minutes of the video if you didn't have the time. And I couldn't do it. And I thought at first maybe this was just my failings as a writer to summarize something that I know in a reasonable amount of depth. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've come to conclude that it's actually just to do with the nature of Total War Three Kingdoms economy. Because no single aspect of Three Kingdoms economy is exactly deep. No single mechanic is ever going to give you a tremendous amount of pause, but it's very broad. There's a lot of asymmetrical mechanics that you have to bring together into a cohesive whole to really have an economy that thrives, which makes it incredibly difficult to summarize accurately. And I think that might be why the people who have difficulty with Three Kingdoms economies are having those problems in the first place. So I'm going to try to go through every single aspect of the economy today, and hopefully by the end of it, you're going to have a more cohesive picture of how to make money in 3K. So let's get started. So the first thing that you need to know about Three Kingdoms is that there are 7 different ways that every faction has available to make money. Industry, commerce, and peasantry, trade, diplomacy, food, and war. And we're going to break down each one, show you how they work, when you should be doing them, and when appropriate, what factions specialize in each area. So let's start from the top, industry, commerce, and peasantry. I'm going to group these 3 together because they all fall under settlement management, and there's not much difference between the 3 of them anyway. These are the backbone of any economy. And if you look at exactly how your settlements make money, you can see that each type of income works with a very simple formula. Raw income plus a percentage multiplier. A large portion of that income is going to come from your resource settlements, and your city will enhance and supplement that. So you're going to want to be taking whole commanderies rather than isolated settlements. Once you do, you're going to benefit more by stacking a single type of income in each individual commandery as much as you can, rather than trying to fit all 3 evenly into one city. And the type that you should build for is going to depend on the minor settlements in that commandery. So if you've got mines, build for industry. You've got a trade port, build commerce. Lumberyard, you want peasantry. For the most part, this is all color-coded with the Wuxing element system, so it's very easy in the building browser to find most of the buildings you want for each income type. The same is true of reforms. The higher tier buildings are all locked behind certain reforms, so it's a good idea to have a look around you in the early game, figure out what resources are at your disposal and where you want to expand, so you know what buildings you want and you can prioritize working up the right reform trees from the start of the game. Reforms are very often a 5, maybe 10-year project, so you want to be getting on that train as early as you can, so that the higher tier buildings are now available to you as soon as you need them. This also means it's pretty good to give yourself an economic focus and specialize in a single type of income. You don't have to ignore all of the others, they'll still make you some money, but the reform tree is going to force you to commit to a single choice each year at the expense of all of the others. So it's good to know where your strengths are, and it's good to know it early so that you can play into them and start really building into what you are going to thrive at. To give you a few examples, a really good industry commandery would be Taiyuan in the northern mountains where Zhengjian starts. That has both an iron mine and a toolmaker. Or Jianye, Wu's historical capital. That gives you both a copper and a salt mine, as well as a harbor for some extra commerce on the side. A good commerce commandery would be Zhangke, just off the Yu River, that has a tea house and a trading port, or Chansha, which is Sun Jian's starting location. That has both of those, plus a bonus armor craftsman to boot. Peasantry is kind of a weird one because lumberyards are the minor settlements that give you the most peasantry income, but generally I've noticed lumberyards don't often take place in a lot of land that's particularly good for peasantry income. Generally, you want your peasantry income to tie in well with farmland because the reforms you get in the reform tree will benefit that land the most. So locations like Saoca's starting spot in Chun or Yangzhou just south of it are great places to build peasantry economies. If all 3 are available to you and you don't know what to build, I would suggest prioritizing industry. While all three of them are more than capable of making you, well, more money than you could feasibly spend in the endgame, industry benefits the most from high raw income rather than percentage multipliers, so it has an easier time getting off the ground and, as such, an easier time in the early game when you can just focus on building that state workshop and upgrading the minor settlements to give yourself that plus, 500 to 1,000 raw income, as opposed to needing to build 2, 3, 4 different buildings within a city to boost up your percentage multipliers. And as a quick aside, don't forget about population in your cities. Not only can you construct an additional building each turn with every million people, but as your city grows, you also get a bonus percentage to income from all sources that goes as high as 200%. It's valuable stuff. So what about trade? In short, so long as you have a route connecting your capital to someone else's, you can trade with them. And you should be. Most factions start with at least one available trade agreement, but the AI will typically sign deals as soon as they can, so you want to beat them to it. So as soon as you have your capital, and that's usually turn 1, look to see who you can trade with. Trade ports are naturally very useful for trading, but not because they give you trade income. What they actually offer is a naval route to other factions who also have ports, significantly expanding your scope of potential partners. Don't forget that trade also provides resources, so having that range allows you to trade with factions across the map who have access to resources far out of your reach, particularly useful for those difficult to get resources like silk and tea that might be on the other end of the map. Once you have your trade agreements, you won't necessarily be making the same from it as your trade partner. Instead, you're going to be competing with their trade influence to snag a bigger piece of the pie. You can check whether you're earning more than them by hovering over the trade section of your treasury tab, and if you're not, you can always build a marketplace to give you an extra 50% and start to tip those scales in your favor. Commerce economies generally benefit the most from trade since they're the ones naturally building marketplaces, and the commerce reforms give you buffs to things like trade influence and extra agreements that you can sign. But no faction comes close to trade as Kong Rong. His faction resource, Trade Monopoly, buffs his trade influence for every trade agreement he signs. It gets pretty good. I should also give a shout out actually to Sun Tzu in A World Betrayed. Sun Tzu's faction is just pretty great at everything, to be honest. Industry, commerce, food, trade, whatever, you name it. If you want to be good at it, he can do it. That faction snowballs so hard in so many different directions. You just pick the direction you want and he's gonna be great. It doesn't matter. Honestly, like, that could just be the video right here. Like, delete this script, cut out the rest of the video, doesn't matter. 10-second clip. You want a good economy? Play Sun Tzu. Like, comment, subscribe. Anyway, diplomacy. Let's talk about diplomacy. These last three could all technically fall under diplomacy, but I want to give food and war their own spotlight. So let's cover everything else first. Almost any diplomatic deal in the game can be sold for cash. It's super simple. If the other faction has a positive attitude to the deal, you can ask them for gold to even things out, either in one lump sum or spread out over 10 turns. Whether that's with a non-aggression pact, a trade deal, even a marriage, it's always worth keeping an eye out for those lucrative deals that you can make. And the quick deal tab is a great resource for this. Any faction highlighted in green is usually willing to pay you to make that deal happen. Heck, you can even take territory that you don't particularly want and sell it to your neighboring vassals and allies. I'd also like to give a special mention to ancillaries, since they have a static diplomatic value. A basic ancillary will always be worth +2, for instance. So this means as factions get richer, the more the campaign goes on, the more they're going to be willing to pay for an ancillary because they value their own money less. But this doesn't mean that you should hoard ancillaries until the end of the game, because you should also be valuing that money less yourself as well as your economy grows. But it is usually smart to hold off on selling ancillaries until you need to, whenever that ends up being. Ancillaries aren't going to be a reliable source of income for you, and you obviously are going to want many for your own armies as well. But they do mean that craftsman settlements and military forge buildings can bring some indirect income to the table. One of the best ways to make money with diplomacy is, of course, food. Every faction needs to feed their cities and armies, but the AI is honestly pretty bad at this in the early game, particularly the rich aggressive factions, the taking and expanding cities. And this is a great opportunity for you. If you have a food surplus over, say, 5, and you're not planning to use that for expansion in the next 2 years, then that food is doing nothing for you. You may as well sell it. Factions that start next to lots of farmland like Cao Cao and Yuan Shao can make great use of this. You want to be looking for factions that are rich in money but poor in food. When you've found one, they will have a base +1 stance to being offered food at all. On top of that, if they have a food deficit, they'll value each individual food at +1.5 until they hit 0, then +0.5 for each food until they hit a surplus of 10. When that all adds up, you can charge some pretty exorbitant fees to be China's food daddy. I should point out that selling food does typically get less lucrative as the game goes on because factions will start feeding themselves, and in some campaigns there's never really a demand for it at any point. But it is worth keeping an eye on, particularly for a juicy early game boost to your income. And finally, we have war. And the most important thing I can tell you is to never underestimate the value of peace. Not only does having peace mean you can field less armies and keep your costs down, but you can sell peace to your enemies. So before wiping a faction out, ask yourself if you'd rather beat a peace out of them instead and use that money to fund your next war, or you can beat a peace out of somebody else, and the cycle continues. This is known as the war economy, and it can make a lot of money. Deng Jian in particular is incredible at this. Rather than asking for peace, she can demand regular tribute, which not only is indefinite, but her infamy faction resource and her tribute hall building add a percentage multiplier to any tribute you receive, which is how you get those insane numbers I showed you at the start of the video. You can even use this as a subversive form of warfare if done right. Factions who can't pay their armies suffer attrition in the same way as if they have no food. So in multiplayer, I have signed peace deals that have bankrupted enemy factions, netting me loads of money and rendering them defenseless for my allies to just steamroll through their remaining territories. In addition to all that, you can sell your assistance to allies in any wars that they may be fighting. You don't even need to actually help. If all goes well, you can charge your ally for your assistance in their war, then charge your new enemy for peace later on down the line without committing a single soldier, and you just made a whole bunch of free money. And don't forget about sacking settlements. I would avoid this if you want the city for yourself, but if you don't and you want a nice payday, sacking cities is a great option for you. And that's it. That's almost everything you need to know about building an awesome economy in Three Kingdoms. Before I wrap up, I'll just give you 5 quick tips that new players often overlook. 1. Armies are expensive. Manage your wars so you never get in over your head, and if you can get good at fighting with the cheap militia units in the early game, you'll give your economy more breathing room to grow. 2. Invest your money. Money that's sitting in your treasury is wasted money. A lot of people hoard their wealth, have precious small income, and think they're doing well because they have the biggest treasury. But that economy is volatile. All it takes is a sudden rush of expenses, some unexpected war to bring your finances to its knees. Spend what you've got. Aim for high income, low savings, and you'll be able to weather any storm. 3. Check your court costs. Characters cost money, and a big bloated court can drain your funds fast. If you're struggling, maybe it's time to start thinking about who's really worth keeping around and telling those who aren't to go and find work elsewhere. 4. Once you get big enough, and this is usually around the mid-game, you'll start to accumulate corruption, which is a percentage penalty to your income in a commandery. You can build state workshops and administration office buildings to counter this, but once you start nearing the endgame, it's usually more worthwhile simply expanding with vassals. They will pay you 20% of their income each turn, and you won't incur more corruption costs on your main moneymakers. 5. The treasury tab is your friend. So many people neglect this. It breaks down nearly everything you need to know about your income and expenditure, so you can see exactly where all your money is going and can really help you make informed decisions if you're ever unsure what to do. That really is it. And armed with this, you should now be able to build a treasury fit for an emperor. If you have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the comments, or you can come by my Twitch and ask them live. I stream 3 nights a week, usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and tonight, the day this video goes live, I'll be starting my first Furious Wild playthrough, and we can figure out how the Nan-Man economy works together. I'm recording this in mid-August, so I don't actually know the exact day when that is, but I'll make sure they line up. So if you're watching this in early to mid-September, that's what I'll be doing. And even if you're not, even if you're finding this months later, Three Kingdoms is a very heavy feature on my channel, Total War in general, actually, so you're more than welcome at any time to come by and have a chat. I'll drop a link in the comments below, and I'll see you there.